We will show several thought-provoking video monologues which display professional ethics case studies that you may experience as a teaching assistant. These are complex in the sense that they pose multi-layered ethical dilemmas with no easy answers, and they are meant to foster conversations that might otherwise be avoided. Casey and Julian, two of the GSO teaching fellows, will lead the discussion following each scenario. Prior to breaking for lunch, you'll receive a resource packet, which offers a list of possible ways to handle each situation, along with recommendations and resources that TAs can provide students and colleagues. So to get started, we'll show the first video. Please remember to watch it intentionally, with the understanding that you'll be asked to participate in a short discussion led by Casey and Julian. Thank you. If we could show the first video, please.
You are a teaching assistant teaching College Writing 1. You are concerned about one of your students' progress.
In this week's journal entry, Angela wrote how frustrated she was and that she wanted to quit school. I know I've seen her looking tired recently, and she's been late to class. She seems reserved, and she rarely participates. Is it the challenges of adjusting to college life, which is normal, or is it her job? She has told me she works late nights. Her journal entries show some family and personal issues. She says she's the first one in her family to go to college and that her parents weren't willing to provide their income information for financial aid. I've tried to reach out to her, especially through her work, which is really just okay at this point. I mean, the rough draft of her research paper was terrible. She seems to have trouble with sentence structures, and her outline is a mess. And then, the note she put at the end of her draft saying that she didn't know what a reference page was. I recommended that she visit the Writing Commons, but she said she was too busy. I feel bad and I'm concerned, but how much do I try to get involved? Is it within my responsibilities to reach out to her beyond issues of her academic work?
And the many times that I've done this, this is the most conversation I've ever heard, so I'm feeling really great about this right now. So I hate to interrupt, but I heard lots of, just in wandering around this side of the room, I heard a lot of great points coming up about teaching and responsibilities and what kind of resources that you should maybe share with this student. So who would like to be brave and offer some of the things either that you talked about or something interesting that you heard a colleague or peer say at the table with the larger group? And I can bring the microphone to you.
Well, we were just saying that it's important to empathize with the student and to also to point them in the correct direction, but just to let them know that this is very, very common, especially in the, go ahead. You're not alone. It's very common, and as graduate students, we're probably going through the same thing too.
Right, so absolutely telling the student, you know, it's very common for people to feel overwhelmed, and it is something that's serious, and college is important, and juggling all these things are important. And so, and then turning them towards whatever resources you think might be available, which we can talk about in a minute.
Oh, okay, great. My table, we had a different approach to it. It's more of a fight or flight type of deal. We know that college is hard, but we would encourage a student to press forward. But we also know that college isn't for everyone, and if you can't swing it, then you need to reevaluate, you know, what sacrifices you need to make. It sounds like she has a lot on her plate, this student. And so maybe this is not the right time for her to be in college. I think the consensus was that sometimes you have to put priorities, and if job is more important or family is more important, then of course attend to those. And then when the student's ready to come back, you know, welcome her, but definitely don't, you know, skirt around the issue that, you know, if she just keeps pressing forward, she's going to make it, because some students don't.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point about students' lives being very complex. And in reality, only the student knows everything that's going on in his or her life and what they're able to handle. But pointing students into some particular areas of assistance or resources can help them make that determination or potentially lighten that load. So did anyone come up with some ideas about resources that they would point the student to? Indira, something back there?
working? Yes, it is. No. Is it working? Okay, there we go. Okay, well, I think we all know that we were all freshmen at one point. I mean, we're all graduate students, but we were all freshmen, undergrads at one point. I remember my freshman year, psychologically and emotionally was very, very tough on me, and so I might recognize that with this particular student and ask them to maybe seek some help at the psychological services center at the health center, and then, you know, if she's too embarrassed or if she says, oh, I'm too busy, I can't, then what I may end up doing, just depending on how severe I think her case may be, I may get in touch with them myself and ask them to reach out to her, just to kind of give her some extra support during her first year in college.
And certainly it's a policy of academic departments that if you feel that a student is overwhelmed, and certainly if you feel like a student is in the position where they may harm themselves or other people, it is your duty to report that up the chain of command in your department. But also if you feel like a student might be struggling, and from this scenario it is a little unclear, is the student overwhelmed to the point where they may need some social and emotional support, it is a good idea to refer them to those places. And there are two on campus. One is University Health Services in DeWeese, and with the psychological services, and then there's also the Counseling and Human Development Center in Whitehall. So there's kind of two different approaches, more of a medical approach and more of a counseling approach that could be utilized in that situation. How about in terms of her academic work, in terms of her writing? Because it seems like she is struggling with many things, and that could have social and emotional implications, but what about her grades and her work in your class? What are your responsibilities in terms of helping that along? Did anyone talk about that? Oh, so many
Behind
hands.
you.
We'll have to fight it out.
Right behind you, Casey. Right here in the blue.
I think what I would do if I was the teacher is I would remind the student about my office hours and that I'm available to help, but not do the work for her. I would basically just open up the doors, and if she wants to take advantage of the opportunity to have more help, then she knows it's available if she wants to take advantage of it. So.
Mm-hmm. Sure, and this varies from department to department, but in my department we're required to have office hours and we're required to list them for students, so they know how to make appointments with us and offering that extra help. My first semester teaching for the university, which was several years ago, I got some really good advice from my mentor who said, remember, you don't teach courses, you teach students. And so the responsibility isn't to just deliver the information, but to help move students forward. And sometimes utilizing office hours or extra help in that way can be really, really helpful for students.
Yeah, well, it showed that the student was having a lot of problems with her writing. You know, the teacher said she didn't even know what a reference paper was. Well, first off, I would explain that to her. In addition, say, I see you're having, a few issues here with your writing, and I would refer her to the writing center so she could get very specialized help.
Right, and we just learned about some of those services right from the library's presentation about there's a writing center, there's also specialized tutoring available within the library. There's also something called the Academic Success Center that offers specialized tutoring, and sometimes students qualify based on their income or other demographic information for what's called TRIO, which is a specialized tutoring program to help students make it through their first year of college.
Actually, I would like to share some of my experience as a TA. Like this situation is very common. So the way that I was dealing with is because, the students look up to the teacher assistant because we are like close in age, more than the lecturer and the professor. So they're seeking for help from the teacher assistant more than the lecturer. So I give more from my time. I cut from my own time for them. So if it's not, if she's not able to come to the classes, I will try to have like a Skype call or stuff like this. At some extent, I can help. Like maybe I can come on myself for her. But to some extent, when it comes to exams and tests, I can't help. But I put my student as a priority. Like I do everything possible to make even I can't do the work for her for sure, but anyway, there is a lot of ways that you can help, and it will be suitable for you and suitable for the student at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's going to vary from whether you're the TA and not the instructor of record, or if you are the instructor of record, how many students do you have, how much extra assistance do other students need, and figuring out what your own philosophy is in terms of how much you can give to each student is something that's very tricky to work out, but it is really important to think about. What we're going to do now, I know you have lots of other thoughts but on this particular scenario, but we're going to move on to a new scenario, and we're going to follow the same pattern. So we'll watch this one again and then think about, as you're watching it, what moves you or strikes you or what you find interesting, and then we'll share again as a group, this time with Julie and facilitating.
You are an English composition teaching assistant who has just discovered that one of your students heavily plagiarized a final paper that is worth 40% of her grade, and you feel strongly that the plagiarism was intentional. You meet with this student to tell her she has received an F on the paper, and she says,
"Please, don't fail me on the paper. An F on the final basically means I'm going to fail this course, and this is the only class I have left in order to graduate. I realize that I made a few mistakes in the paper, like not citing sources or using quotation marks, but I've been under a lot of stress recently. I just lost my grandfather, whom I was very close to, and it's been really hard on me. It took all of the strength I had just to finish and turn in the paper, so I cut some corners and copied and pasted in some places. Really, given my circumstances, is what I did that big of a deal? Can't I just go to plagiarism school or something?"
All right. So, I hear some people are more on the harsher side, some people are more on the lenient side. So let's hear from some people what you think. Okay, so remember, you think that the plagiarism is intentional, but she has some circumstances that maybe could be taken into account. Okay.
As an English teacher, I've encountered this a few times, and what we were talking about at our table, some things that you should do at the beginning of the semester should safeguard against something like this and make it a very easy decision for you. Not necessarily emotionally, but as an instructor for your responsibilities to your department and also to your other students. So having your plagiarism statement, which is required in your syllabus, teaching what plagiarism is and how to avoid it, using the modules that the library has, all of those things, and making it exceedingly clear what your policies are, and as soon as they submit things for a grade, if there is plagiarism, what happens. That way, you aren't showing any kind of favoritism, and you aren't tempted, even in the emotional situations that students will bring up. It's kind of alarming that this is a senior who needs a beginning comp class to graduate, but at that point they should know better. So as a comp instructor, it should be freshmen and sophomores that you're dealing with. So maybe there's some other stuff that we could refer her for, but you should have something clear in the syllabus that would indicate that she would fail the paper or fail the entire class.
Okay, that's a very, very good advice. Actually, you are required to have a statement about plagiarism in your syllabus. So everything should be discussed beforehand, right? And like you said, this can, you can avoid in that way having to be involved in those emotional situations. Who else?
Hello. I teach in the ESL department here at Kent State. I have had this situation, unfortunately, many times with my international students. We just need to remember that students coming from overseas have a different mindset about school. They also have been educated differently. They also could write any paper they want, but it wouldn't be in English. They'd still get an A, right? So having students from overseas, other cultures, they have a different set of needs. So as a TA or a teacher or an instructor, you should make sure that you have all the resources available to you to help. If you come into this situation, of course, make sure it's in your syllabus and that you explain that to all the students. But ask your advisor, ask your lead teacher for help, because every situation is different, and especially considering international students. Their idea of plagiarism is very different than ours as an American growing up in the American education system.
And that brings up a good point that Julian can talk to you about in terms of intention and plagiarism school, right?
Right, and in this case, I mean, you make a very good point about international students and that need to be educated on this, but at the same time, you need to keep in mind that they have to observe certain policies and what do you do what are you supposed to do when you're faced with plagiarism? Does anybody have any ideas? And I heard a lot of people laughing when she mentioned plagiarism school. What do you think about that?
Well, I don't have a comment on plagiarism school, but I think you have to make the distinction between majors, and you know what I mean. So if I'm teaching in the biology department, if I have a student that's, say, history or political science, I would treat those students differently than the actual biology majors if they're in like a general class, for instance. So you know what to expect from kids in your major, but you know, maybe this isn't someone else's passion if they're, you know, a history major. So in those cases, I think you give a second chance if it's not applicable to what they're going to do for the rest of their lives.
Okay, thank you. I think the term second chance is very important here, because what you actually have to do is, if you are faced with plagiarism, you have to report that to the student conduct office. And in that case, you can see if that person if it's the first time, and if that person is going to be given a second chance, okay? Because you might think that you're giving the person a second chance, but this person might be doing this in every class, and this is maybe the 40th chance that the person is getting as a senior, right? So in order to know whether this person is actually, this is the first time that they're plagiarizing, because they're not supposed to, there's a very strict policy that it needs to be observed, then you need to report this to student conduct office.
Could you just quickly clarify what plagiarism school is?
Well, it's not a school. It's not an actual school. But in that case, and I don't know exactly what happens, but if from what I know is that if the students, this is the first time that this is happening, then they are given a second chance. And if it was not intentional, right, then they can go through a little workshop that will tell them, this is how you cite, this, you know, maybe through the writing commons or
in the library, university libraries.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So they will get schooled into what is plagiarism and what is not. Okay, and in that sense, they are given a second chance. But we need to know whether this is a second chance or a 40th chance. Yeah.
Last question.
Can you hear me? Oh, that's loud. Back to the whole circumvention issue. I know that there. Okay. So I know there are policies in place, so if a student does have a medical excuse or a death in the family or some other issue, that you can get extensions on papers or take an exam at a later date. So I think that would be something that you'd want to discuss at the beginning of the semester so that they know that they actually have options aside from trying to write a paper the night before when their grandpa just died.
Yeah, that's a very good observation. Actually, we were discussing with Casey that a lot of times when you have plagiarism, it's from lack of preparation. And maybe there are personal circumstances. And in that case, what you want to tell your students is that you have to be proactive. You have to reach out to your teachers, to your professors, and let them know what is happening in your life, rather than just have that happen and then turn in something that is really not good and that you know you plagiarized, right? So you have to be proactive. Anything else? Did I miss anything? No, I think we covered it all. So we're going to move on to the next scenario, and then Casey is going to lead that one. And again, watch the video and think in terms of what you would do and what you would not do, and suggestions you could have for that student.
You are a teaching assistant, and the chair's daughter is in your class. She approaches you after the first day of class and says, "Hey, let me introduce myself. My name is Jane, and I'm the chair's daughter. I wanted to bring that back to your attention, well, that I'm his daughter, because I've heard rumors that this class can be challenging. And since my dad is who he is, both he and I expect that I'll do very well, regardless of the rigor of the work. Of course, I'm not expecting special treatment from you or anything, but still. Do you understand what I'm saying? Are we on the same page?"
We can't wait to hear what you think about Jane, the chair's daughter. So Indira already has someone back here who's ready for a comment. So what could we do or not do in this situation?
Hi, friends. So I think in this scenario, I would not even acknowledge the fact that she came up like that to me. And I would say what I heard you say is that you're concerned about the challenging rigor of this course. And I understand and appreciate that. And if you're concerned about that, here are my office hours. I can advocate for you. I can empower you with these resources. Come and see me if you need me.
Right. Excellent way to deflect the situation. Say, you know, you've heard that my course is difficult. I assure you that if you do all the required work, you'll be just fine. Here are some resources for you. You can always come to my office hours, and not even enter into a discussion about the fact that she's trying to strong-arm you by her, you know, her father being the chair, the dean, or whatever, right? Who else has an idea?
Hi. One thing that we were considering is that sometimes you may have someone who is as outspoken about that immediately, and sometimes they may not necessarily make that approach or say it in so many words, but they may carry that attitude also. And so you may experience where a situation arises from that, to where they may be acting as if they expect that preferential treatment in some regard. And so, kind of to piggyback off of what she was saying, in our position, to just make sure that that treatment is consistent, and if we need to say something and confront them about it, then to just remind them, you know, if you're doing well just like everyone else. If you're plagiarizing, you're going to plagiarizing school just like everyone else, one way or the other.
Right, and so it doesn't necessarily have to be the chair's daughter or someone who's trying to explicitly ask for preferential treatment, but maybe a student who just thinks, you should be giving me better grades than this, just to emphasize the fairness, right?
Hi. You've heard a lot from us, sorry. So pretty much what I've done when I was teaching at my other university was, one, you have to treat all your students equally, if she is the dean's daughter or if they are a different major. But we kind of took it a step further. What if the dean approached you and be like, I expect my daughter to do well in this class? There's always someone higher up on the food chain, and you report them. It does happen, unfortunately, in the world. Humans aren't the best of creatures. So it happens at the biggest thing that you have to remember is there's someone above them that you can go to. So never let yourself be strong-armed.
So if you do have that kind of uncomfortable interaction, you can always talk to a supervisor, talk to someone who isn't under that person's authority. That would be important. But the other thing that's important is if, let's say, the chair or the dean did come to you and say, I'm wondering how my daughter's doing in this course. Or conversely, you can't go to the dean and say, listen to what your daughter did, because of a federal law called FERPA, Federal Educational Right to Privacy Act. And so unless people sign the appropriate paperwork, you can't share a student's academic progress with their parent or their family without everyone signing off on it. So you need to make sure that even though the student did something that you find unsavory, you can't go and tell their father what they did, because then you're violating their right to privacy. So we'll take one more comment and then we'll move on to our last one.
I just wanted to say, basically, I take life as a test, and every little instance is a quiz in that big, grand test. And this would be one of those situations where it's just another quiz of your character. I would say that your syllabus is your backbone when push comes to shove. If this student was to approach me, since it's also in the scenario at the beginning of class, and hearsay, I wouldn't even approach the hearsay that she said about the challenging of course or anything like that. I would just basically go over the syllabus with her point by point about expectations of what I expect from her as a student, and of course offer her any help or office hours and times, because then you keep it professional. You keep it to what it is that, I mean, it's a job. Going to class is a job. So you're also helping the student learn the responsibilities of being an adult. And if you sway in either of these scenarios, one way or the other, you're not really helping your student. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So using the syllabus as your contract for both what you do for your students and what your students are held accountable for is the way to go, right? That will keep you safe every time the syllabus is your contract, okay? All right, so we're gonna watch one more before we break for lunch. I know you're all starving, but the same thing, one more video and one more short discussion.
You are a non-native English-speaking teaching assistant for a statistics course, and one of your students approaches you after class with a concern.
Hi, do you have a minute? I wanted to talk to you about some issues I'm having in your class. I'm always there and I try really hard, but it seems like no matter what I do, I just can't keep up and I'm getting bad grades. I haven't come to your office hours before to talk to you about this because I don't really know how to say this. I think I'm not doing well because, I'm sorry, but I don't understand you. No offense, but your accent makes it really hard for me to follow. I always read and come to class prepared, but I'm getting tired of not doing well, despite everything I do for this class. I appreciate you offering to help me during your office hours, but I shouldn't have to put in all the extra effort to understand what my teacher's saying. I already spend a lot of time on this class, much more than any of my other classes I'm taking. You know, my parents pay for me to go to college and expect me to get good grades, but then I get teachers like you who can't even speak English. How am I supposed to do well? Stats is hard enough as is.
How would you handle this situation? Okay? The teacher is an international teacher. The student says, I don't understand you, that's why I'm not doing great.
I mean, there's all different kinds of ways. You can get help through tutoring, and if it's stats, which is what I think it's at, it's still, you know, as we were saying, it's numbers are numbers. Doesn't matter. And the other thing is, if you want extra help, it's available. But the other thing that's going to help the student in life is that this is a difficult situation and college is hard. Yes, it is. And sometimes there are extraneous circumstances that make it even harder. So, you know, you just have to sort of buck up and work through it. It's, you know, tough.
Okay, very good advice.
Tough love from the front.
Say this, you know, give more resources. Say, I'm here for extra help. This is what I can do for you. And also, this is a life lesson. Okay, who else?
So, this kind of goes both ways. The student maybe shouldn't get so worked up about it, but also the teacher. It can be really hurtful to hear that, you know, you're really trying to communicate with your students and they're just not hearing you, they're not getting the information. But like in that moment, you can't show that offense. You can't get upset about it. You know, get upset on your own time. While you're there with the student, offer them resources, but also think about how maybe you could put up your, your materials online maybe before the lecture so they can follow along, or offer to give the student lecture notes, print it out so that they don't have to deal with the accent, or give them maybe the office hours for another TA or another professor, or maybe refer them to another section if that's an option, just to try to work that out with them.
Okay, very good. So again, more examples of resources, and very, very good advice too. Do not take this personally as a teacher, right? And my question for you is, if you have only one student complaining about this, how is the rest of the class doing? How is it that 29 students understand you and one person doesn't? How do you handle that, right? Who else would like, yeah?
And just to add on to what everyone was saying too, I'm a firm believer in don't just come to me with a problem, come with a solution tied to it. So I think that would be one of the first things I would want to know is, okay, if this is a legit problem that you're having and it's interfering with your learning, what can I do to help you? What things would best be, would help you get around this? Because at the end of the day, the student needs the course and you're the one teaching it. So you can't just change that. And the other thing I would do is ask them some questions, because are they doing the prep work for the course? If this is the first time they're hearing some new terms and it's harder to understand with an accent or different pronunciation, maybe if they're doing their part and they're hearing those terms and reading those things on their own time, coming to the course prepared, then when they're hearing those words, oh, I recognize that, seeing it in the notes. So I think it's also putting a little bit back on the student too to be accountable.
Okay, that's very good. Again, not taking this personally and finding a solution rather than coming up with a problem. Because one of the things that we see here is the problem of attitude, right? Of the students say, well, no offense, but it's just, I don't understand you. And it is good advice to say, yes, well, here, and take this calmly, right? And then ask the student to come up with solutions instead of coming up with problems. So we're gonna take one more comment and then we're gonna break for lunch.
Hi, just one more thing. I had this problem as a student, actually, not as a teacher, back when I was an undergrad. Very simple solution, record the lecture. Allow your student to sit there with a recorder and let them record their lecture so they can listen again. I have a problem with speaking too fast in my lectures, so a similar issue. But then I ask the students, hey, record my lecture, listen to it again. I'm sorry, I'm doing my best, but we all have something to deal with, so.
Wonderful, thank you very much. And we want to thank you all very much for participating like this.